My name is Julie Dumalet. I'm the Pro-Life Director with the Archdiocese. And so Erica was kind enough to ask me to come talk to y'all about the Dobbs case. She said there's a lot of confusion. Obviously, it's a lot in the news. Big deal right now. So what I thought we could do is let's just, I want to share with you some points that we don't often talk about when we're talking about abortion, some things maybe that you haven't heard, maybe that you haven't thought of, just kind of some food for thought. And then I think it would be helpful to do kind of a Q&A, just what's on your mind, about this issue. What have you heard? What have you heard maybe that's concerning? Actually, before we get started, does anybody have anything that, just like burning questions that are on your mind, or things that you've heard that you find concerning, so we make sure that we address those? And if you think of anything, just throw your hand up and stop me. But let's begin with prayer. I love this prayer. This is from the opening sessions of the Second Vatican Council. They would always pray this prayer before they got started. It's kind of a prayer for peace and for wisdom. And I think as we're talking about this topic, obviously it brings up a lot of emotions for a lot of people. So peace and wisdom can be a really good thing. So if you'll join me in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. And if you'll join me. We stand before you, Holy Spirit, conscious of our sinfulness, but aware that we gather in your name. Come to us, remain with us, and enlighten our hearts. Give us light and strength to know your will, to make it our own, and to live it in our lives. Guide us by your wisdom, support us by your power, for you are God, sharing the glory of Father and Son. You desire justice for all. Enable us to uphold the rights of others. Do not allow us to be misled by ignorance or corrupted by fear or favor. Unite us to yourself in the bond of love and keep us faithful to all that is true. As we gather in your name, may we temper justice with love, so that all our discussions and reflections may be pleasing to you and earn the reward promised to good and faithful servants. We ask this of you who live and reign with the Father and the Son, one God, forever and ever. Amen. So one of the things whenever we're talking about abortion or anything to do with pro-life or pro-family or anything like that, we're always talking about, are we acting in a way so as to best respect human dignity? So human dignity is always going to be the key for any kind of pro-life issue that we have. And well, okay, so let me just start with giving us kind of the landscape of where we are after the Dobbs case. So as you probably know, Roe v. Wade, 49 years ago, was decided, and it basically said a state cannot prohibit abortions. A state must have legal abortion up until the point of fetal viability, or up until the point that a child could survive outside the womb by itself, okay? And so at that time, that was about 28 weeks. Now it's between 20 and 22 weeks. So that line keeps moving, but that's basically what they said. So I think in 1973, you had 4 states that allowed abortion outright. And so overnight, it went from 4 states allowing abortion to 50 states allowing abortion. And what's interesting, in 1973, if you were to have polled Americans and said, do you think abortion should be legal at any time? The vast majority of Americans would have said, no, I don't think so. Well, now it's almost completely reversed. A majority of Americans will say, yes, abortion should be legal at some point during pregnancy. Okay? And we can see our morality very often follows what the law is. If something is around us, it's all around us. We tend to assume that, well, if it's legal, it must be moral. And that's not always the case, we know that, but there is kind of that assumption unless we kind of stop and think about it. Okay, so it's taken us almost 50 years to get to that point, to have that shift. It may take us a few decades to get back to the point where people go, okay, yeah, this really is morally concerning. This really is a problem. So when I've talked to Cardinal, it's like, okay, this is the long game. We're playing the long game. It's going to take a while for hearts and minds to shift. Okay, so we know that. So I have this very colorful map up here. What does it mean? I think we've got a few more folks. Hi, come in. We're just getting started. Welcome. So this map up here kind of represents what we anticipate is going to happen now. So 13 states, let me start with the blue states. The blue states are those, not surprising, New York, Illinois, California, Washington. These are states that already have very permissive abortion laws. So Colorado, for example, hello, welcome. The deep blue state of Colorado allows abortion up till birth. So does the state of New Mexico. So the blue states represent the states that are going to be trying to increase abortion access and to expand it. All right. The green states are states that are likely to be trying to limit abortion access. Okay, so Texas has what's known as a trigger law, which I always tell people has nothing to do with gun control. But the trigger law simply means that if and when the Supreme Court allows the state to limit abortion, then that limit automatically becomes the law in the state of Texas. And there were 13 other states of these green states that had similar laws in effect before Dobbs was decided. The red states are a little bit ambiguous because what tends to happen there is there's a desire on the part of the citizenry to limit abortion. Like let's take Florida, for example. So the citizens would like to pass laws limiting abortion, but their state Supreme Court, for example, has said there is a constitutional right under our Florida state constitution to abortion. Okay, so there's kind of a conflict between the legislature and the state courts in those red states. All right, so that's kind of where we find ourselves. I think it's important to talk about, I just want to give you guys this background. Some of this will be surprising to you, some of it probably won't at all, but whenever I'm giving one of these talks, how many of you are aware that you know somebody who is post-abortive? Just show of hands. Post-abortive, someone who's had at least one abortion. Okay, so 1, 2, 3. Anybody else? Yeah, okay. So most of you. Certainly, I can guarantee you know multiple people who have had abortions. Because in the Catholic Church, it's somewhere between 25% and 33% of all Catholics are post-abortive. Okay, so this is something that very much affects our community. And I always tell people whenever I give one of these talks, if that is your situation, first of all, I'm really sorry that happened to you. And you know, we want to help you if you are seeking help, if you're seeking healing. So if that is you, or if that's a friend of yours, please do reach out. We have our Project Rachel ministry. Abortion can be really devastating psychologically, spiritually, sometimes even physically for men and women. So you may have a male friend who is himself post-abortive, and there is healing available for him as well. So just like to throw that out there. If you know anybody that might need that, they're welcome to call.
Question, sorry.
Yes, sir.
On the 33%, is that both considering the mother and father? Like on the male side, being the father?
Yeah, so it's both. And usually when they do statistics like that, they only track the women, right? So they'll say, well, 25 to 33% of Catholic women have had at least one abortion. But statistically speaking, she didn't do that by herself. There was a male involved, right? So you can say, okay. No, not at all, not at all. Okay, so what are the issues that people cite? So you can see here this adds up to a lot more than 100%, obviously, which means that most people who are having an abortion, they're citing multiple factors, or there's multiple concerns that they have when they're making that decision. Career, education, other children. Being a mom right now is going to kind of get in the way of my life plans, right? Almost as many people say, I just can't afford to take care of a baby. About half say, I'm not in a stable relationship, I don't want to be a single parent. Substantial number of women who have an abortion are already a mom. We think of the teenager going to the abortion clinic because she doesn't want to tell her parents. Substantial number already have kids. Possible problem with fetal health is about 13%, and then 1.5% is rape or incest. So people are citing a number of reasons, and one of the things that we get to do is and I say get to do because it's really a privilege to work with people in healing, but when we have our Project Rachel retreats, sometimes people are coming in a month after their abortion. Sometimes it's been decades. We have 70-year-old women who come for their abortion, and they say, I've been struggling with this, keeping this in. I haven't been able to talk to anybody about this for 30 years. So it's very difficult. And I was on a call with a woman who works with women who are immigrants from Central America. And there, up until recently, priests were not allowed to give absolution for abortion. So you had to go to the bishop. And so if you lived in a rural area, I can't travel to the largest city and make appointment with the bishop so I can go to confession so that I can be absolved. So I guess I'm just out of luck. Now Pope Francis back in 2016 said any priest anywhere can absolve. But this was very trying for a lot of people. Hi, come in. So one of the things I like to talk about is we've all heard abortion is health care. Access. Women should have access to the full range of reproductive health care. So you guys are too young to remember this, but so I graduated high school and went to college in the 90s. And Bill Clinton was president at that time. And the popular phrase among pro-choice people at that time was abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. Okay, and some of you may have heard that phrase. So fast forward now 25 years later, we're in a place where abortion is essential health care, and you have people talking about shout your abortion. Okay, well, what's that about? What accounts for that change? I don't know exactly, except I know that women who feel they've been harmed by abortion are more vocal now in speaking out. Certainly, which is for the good. So we want to talk about, okay, is abortion really health care? So healthcare, if you just look it up, dictionary.com, the field concerned with the maintenance or restoration of the health of the body or mind. Okay? So far, so good. So then we have to ask ourselves, well, is pregnancy a disease or a pathology that needs to be cured, that needs to be taken care of? And generally speaking, yes, things can go wrong with pregnancy, we know that, but pregnancy is a natural condition that, left on its own and cared for, will not lead to any adverse consequences for mom, generally speaking. Now, that's why we need prenatal care. Prenatal care, yes, absolutely essential health care. Is an abortion essential health care? An abortion is really interrupting a natural process, not removing a pathology. And we know that the psychological and spiritual health of not only moms, but dads too, is often compromised by that experience. Now, we don't have good statistics on, well, how many women will say that they're harmed by abortion. Nobody who is I'll say a good researcher or a thorough researcher really does this research. First of all, because it can't get funded, right? So anybody that's doing this research tends to be either on the very, very, very pro-life side or the very, very, very pro-choice side. And there's a lot of flaws in their research. So we don't know how many women long-term say, I have been harmed by my abortion. What I can tell you is that we have roughly 200 dioceses in the United States. Most of them have a Project Rachel ministry. In Houston, we see probably 30 to 45 women a year. There are many, many more women who go to secular counseling or, ecumenical groups for healing. So the number of people who feel that they've been harmed is fairly substantial. So this was a conversation, this was a question that got asked by a mom a couple of weeks ago, and she was 2 weeks post-abortive. What's happening now, as a lot of you probably know, the abortion pill is the main way that people are getting their abortion. And are people familiar with how that works? Yes? No? Okay. When we think of abortion, we tend to think of you go to a surgical clinic and you're kind of given a sedative and, the fetus is removed and all the tissue is removed and then you get up and leave. So the way that the abortion pill works is mom will be given 2 pills. She takes one, and that first one interferes with the cells that connect the baby to the placental wall. Okay, so it causes those cells to die off. So the baby separates from the placenta. It's cut off from its source of nourishment, so it dies. Then 24 hours later, she takes another pill that causes uterine contractions that will essentially cause a miscarriage. And that usually happens at home by herself or in a dorm room or somewhere by herself. But the reason that this is particularly damaging is, a woman's going to come face to face with the remains of her child, as would a woman who's miscarried. And, especially if she's been told, well, it's just a clump of cells, you're not going to see anything. And then you see something that has a recognizable head or hands or arms or, any of that stuff. It's really devastating. So this young woman called, and I could hear there was another little kid running around in the background. I could hear playing. And we were talking, and she was kind of tearful, and I was telling her, well, we have this program and this program that might be helpful. And so as we're about to hang up, I said, well, do you have any other questions for me? And then she said, is it unusual for women to think about killing themselves after an abortion? And unfortunately, it's not that unusual. We have an amazing team, so we were able to get her in with a mental health professional that night, which is wonderful, and she is getting therapy. Have another woman who's coming to our next retreat who, after her abortion 15 years ago, She started drinking heavily, became an alcoholic. She just got through her 4th stint in inpatient rehab. And she's just now saying, I want to come back to the church. I really want healing for this. I attribute my alcoholism to my abortion, but at first I didn't, and So anyway, I mean, there's real consequences here, but the thing about, and some of you who mentioned that you know people who are post-abortive, the thing that always strikes me when I'm talking to people in retreat and they're sharing their stories is, I'm always amazed at how much I'm very pro-life, but my thought is, okay, faced with your situation, I hope that I would have been strong enough to make a different choice. But I actually don't know that I would have been, because you had no help, you had no support, nobody was willing to reach out to you, and in fact, people were actively pushing you in this direction that maybe you didn't even want to go in. And so when we talk about choice, my body, my choice, a lot of the women that I talk to, it wasn't a choice. They were told, you will have no home to go to. We will cut the funding on your education if you don't have an abortion. In a couple of cases, I will kill you if you don't have an abortion. And just all kinds of terrible psychological pressure. And what most of them say is, if somebody had just been there to reach their hand out and say, I will help you, I will show you another way, I would have grabbed it in a heartbeat. But there was nobody to do that. And so this was the choice that I made, except I didn't feel like it was a choice. I felt like I was backed into a corner. And a lot of people will tell you that. So one of the things that we really want to focus on now that we're in this post-Dobbs world is, okay, how do we be those hands that reach out to women and men who feel like they have no other choice, because they do? And how do we support those women so that they can have their career, they can have their education, and they can have their child that they already have? They're already a mother, So how do we do that? And we're going to talk about exactly how we're going to look at that. But as we're doing that, I want to just share with you from the Roe v. Wade opinion. I didn't mention anything about myself before I got started, but my background is as an attorney. I was an employment lawyer for about 10 years before I said, forget this, and got into ministry. No offense to anybody that's going to law school, but it just wasn't for me. It can be a great profession, but it just wasn't for me. So, but this is what the Roe majority, which in 1973, this was 7 men, had this to say about motherhood. So they talked about the detriment the state would impose upon a pregnant woman by denying a choice altogether as a parent. Specific and direct harm may be involved. So they said maternity, parenthood, or additional offspring may force upon a woman a distressful life and future. Psychological harm may be imminent. Mental and physical health may be taxed by childcare. There is also the distress associated with the unwanted child. There is the problem of bringing a child into a family already unable, psychologically and otherwise, to care for it. Okay, so when you read this, if you were an alien from another planet and you came down to Earth and this was how motherhood was described to you, not a very positive picture of motherhood, certainly not a very family-friendly, life-giving picture of parenthood that our Supreme Court came up with here. But I think we can also say that some of the concerns that they raise are concerns that we can understand, and that we as, if you are a pro-life Catholic, that we can get behind, and we can recognize these as legitimate concerns. So when they talk about the distress associated with the unwanted child, An unplanned pregnancy is going to cause some distress. That's a fact, and we need to acknowledge that. How can we help alleviate some of that distress? And is a good solution to alleviating that distress to eliminate an innocent human person, right? Maybe we can find a better way to alleviate that distress. The problem of bringing a child into a family already unable psychologically or otherwise to care for it. Yes, that is definitely a concern. And I know from talking to Erica, some of you guys have been talking about the foster system, and isn't it terrible that a child would immediately go into the foster system? Our foster system has a lot of problems. We know that. I would like to talk at the end of my remarks before we get into Q&A about how the church is trying to get involved in the foster system to help improve it for the kids that are in that system. This is kind of a mixed bag. You know, the view of parenthood and motherhood is pretty negative. Reminder, it was written by seven men. But at the same time, they do raise some concerns that we as Catholics, we want to be concerned with a child growing up in poverty. We want to be concerned with a child who has parents maybe that don't feel prepared to care for it. So I mentioned that I had been an employment attorney, and one of the things that I've really taken notice of since the Dobbs decision is, you probably heard in the news about these various corporations who are saying, if you are an employee of ours and you live in a state that doesn't allow access to abortion, we will pay to fly you to a state that does allow abortion, and we will pay for your abortion. Okay? And kind of the idea is because we're so progressive and we care so much about you, and we want you to have your rights. Okay, well, that having that, my spidey sense is tingling. For those of you who are Marvel fans, you'll know what I mean. But okay, so back in, I think this was in 2018, a number of executives of almost 200 companies put this full page ad in the New York Times, and this was response to they were mostly southern states, Texas, Louisiana, Georgia, trying to pass more restrictive abortion laws. And so these employers came out and they said, you know what, we stand with women. We stand with women. And they said this: simply put, a regulation limiting abortion goes against our values and is bad for business. Okay, well, that's the one honest thing that they said. It's bad for business. It impairs our ability to build diverse and inclusive workforce pipelines, recruit top talent, and protect the well-being of all the people who keep our businesses thriving. Well, so let's talk about that. If your employee has a child or a number of children, they're going to want you to cover that child's insurance. They're probably going to want to take some leave when that child is born. They're probably going to need to take off a little bit more often because their kid has something going on at school, or their kid is sick and they have to take him to the doctor. So if we can get rid of those kids, then we have employees. I'm being very cynical here, but I think this is partly where they're going. If we can get rid of those kids, then those employees are focused on serving us and not serving their family. Okay? Now, lest you think that I'm a big cynic, I want to share with you some stories of some pregnancy discrimination cases that I worked on during my legal career. So Anna was a young woman, worked for like an auto parts store. There was a corporate buyout. There were 21 employees at the time of the buyout, and 20 of them got rehired, and Anna was the only one that they didn't rehire, despite her stellar employment record, despite the fact that she had seniority over several of the other people that got hired. And the only reason that we won that case is because there was a witness who was willing to testify, yeah, the boss told me he didn't want to rehire her because he knew she was pregnant. And therefore, she wasn't going to be long-term as valuable of an employee, as reliable of an employee if she had a kid. So she's out. All right. She was, by the way, the sole breadwinner for her family because her husband had a heart condition and was awaiting a heart transplant. Just to add insult to injury there. We did win that case, though. But if we hadn't had that witness willing to come forward, probably wouldn't have won the case. It's too hard. Okay, so Jennifer, she was a female HR director in a large corporation. She had 2 kids in about 3 years. And when she came back from maternity leave, her second one, she was advised that your job is being eliminated. It's not here anymore. But by the way, we've hired a man for this new position. We'd like you to train him. And yes, he has a different job title than you, but oh, surprise, surprise, a lot of his duties are exactly the same as yours were. And someone was willing to testify to her boss making this comment: I never thought I'd have to ask if birth control for female managers should be mandatory or not during her maternity leave. Okay, so finally, Jessica was a dental assistant. She was terminated on returning from maternity leave as well. And when she came back, her office manager told her, you no longer have a job here, but here's a list of jobs that you might apply for. They'll allow you to spend more time with your baby. That's where your priorities should be. Okay, so is it, I'm going to argue, and I'm going to continue arguing for the next probably few years as we talk about this, that it's our corporate culture. It's our culture that is primarily about making money, production, output, rather than, employee health, employee work-life balance. As Catholics, we believe that our work exists for the sake of our family. Our work exists so that we can support our family. Our family isn't something that's kind of on the side, and our work is, that's the main purpose to our life. Now, certainly we can have a vocation to work. We can have, we can find fulfillment in our work, but, our work shouldn't take us away from our family. It shouldn't be the be-all, end-all. And that's kind of how our society is structured right now. And I think one of the exciting things that we have an opportunity to do now is we can start moving to change that. Because abortion, in some ways, I'm oversimplifying a lot, but abortion has allowed us to fall into this. And if we have families, for example, okay, I didn't mean to go to this slide yet, but one of the things we want to look at in our legislative process. So in Texas, as you probably know, every 2 years, the legislature is in session for 5 months. So it'll be January to May of 2023. What are some things that we can start looking towards to make our workplaces more family friendly? Okay, things like child tax credits, certainly. Parental leave laws, paid parental leave. Quality, affordable daycare. If you have ever known anybody who's trying to work and trying to find someplace to leave their kid, someplace that they're not scared to leave their kid, because there's some daycares out there that are, I wouldn't want to leave my kid there. So quality, affordable daycare. And incentivizing companies to provide these benefits for their employees. Strengthening discrimination laws against pregnancy discrimination. All of these types of things are going to be really crucial going forward. And so we have an opportunity for a paradigm shift in the way that we organize our society, which is kind of exciting, but we know there's a lot of pushback too. So that's not what I want. Sorry, guys. So I just want to talk to you about a couple of things that the church is doing. One is going to be an advocacy effort in next year's legislative session. So I absolutely will keep in touch with Erica, but we would love you guys to be involved in that. Catholic Advocacy Day is something that the bishops' conferences all organize. Everybody goes to Austin. If you're able to join us in Austin, that would be great. Talk to the legislatures. We know there's going to be some of these kind of bills. We would love if you could help us get behind some of that. So the advocacy piece. The other idea is, Catholics and pro-life Catholics in particular are often criticized for, well, you care about the baby being born, but you don't care about it after it's born. And that's not entirely fair, and it's not entirely unfair either, if I'm being honest. Because, and again, not to throw any of my volunteers under the bus, but I will have my volunteers say things like Gabriel Project. So Gabriel Project helps women during pregnancy and up to about a year after the baby is born. And I have had some volunteers say to me, arguing, why are we helping the moms so long after this baby is born? Well, at some point, these women need to just learn to take care of themselves. And it's like, I'm not feeling the Christian love from that. I'm not. But, that's a Catholic person who thinks they're very pro-life. I have had people tell me that women who have abortions are selfish and just out of hand. All women who have abortions are selfish. It's like, really? Not in my experience. Not in my experience. So we often are very concerned about, we've put all our eggs in the basket of let's prevent the abortion. Okay, how are you going to help raise that child so that the mother is living in dignity, the child is living in dignity, the father hopefully is living in dignity? Okay, so we have Gabriel Project. That's great. What about after that baby turns a year old? So that's where we get to Walking with Moms. So this is a program that the U.S. bishops have come up with. In Houston, what we're doing is we're asking parishes really to focus on age 1 to 18. Now, certainly a parish can't, there's a lot of needs from 1 to 18. A parish can't necessarily address all of those needs, but a parish might be able to address some needs. So maybe there's not a lot of resources for parents of toddlers in the area of St. Luke. Is there some way that the St. Luke community could begin to address that and assist those moms? Maybe there's not a lot of support for parents of teenagers in this area. Is there some way that the St. Luke community could step in and help those moms? And then finally, there's the St. Joseph Ministry, which is a ministry about foster care. And we know that there are a lot of kids in the foster system in Texas. We know that there's not enough foster families to care for them. So the St. Joseph Ministry is not about, okay, everybody become a foster family. But it's really about how can we support foster families. So many of you may know, I didn't know this until fairly recently, if you are a foster parent, many of those children have some kind of significant trauma, psychological, emotional, physical trauma that they've dealt with. You are not allowed to, as you would with your biological children, to just leave them with your next door neighbor or your sister. You can only leave that child for babysitting or for respite care with someone who is themselves certified by the foster care system. and there's not that many of those people. So if you're a foster parent and you're feeling overwhelmed because you're living and caring for a child that has significant trauma issues and you don't even have anywhere that you can get a break, that's not going to be a good, healthy situation for anyone. So some parishes are looking at, can a group of us be trained to be respite care providers for foster families in our area? Another thing is, it's expensive to take in a child. Can we have, birthday parties or community building or back to school events for some of the foster kids in our area? And then one of my favorites is mentoring kids that are aging out of foster care. If you are somebody that has bounced around in multiple foster homes, chances are you don't have an adult in your life who could support you, that you could turn to for guidance. And when I was 18, I definitely still needed my parents' advice. I still like to have it now, and I can't imagine what would have happened to me if I couldn't have turned to some sort of responsible adult who cared about me for advice. And so those kind of are the big things that we're pushing right now. The advocacy piece, expanding our care of parents so that we're not just talking about pregnancy, infancy, we're talking about family, okay, and getting involved in the foster system. That's a real concern for many, and it should be. That's something we need to do better with. So those are just some ideas. Hopefully those are some things that you haven't thought of around this topic, so I hope that gives you some food for thought. But I did want to have or allow for some Q&A, and it doesn't have to be about anything that we talked about here. It can be whatever's on your mind. So I'll throw it to you guys. Yes?
I'd say my main question is just how to approach, somebody that doesn't agree,
Mm-hmm.
and even trying to start the discussion but y'all can't even agree on that the fetus is like a person.
Right.
So then how do you can't go from there? You're just stuck,
Yeah. So I think a couple things. Some people are just not going to be ready to listen right now. And so if you haven't read, so Cardinal DiNardo put out a statement the day that the Dobbs decision was released, and it's on the Archdiocesan website. I think it's still on the main homepage. But in that, I'd encourage you to read it. He talked about, we just need to have patience with people. Because as I talked about at the beginning, it's taken us 50 years to get to a certain place. It's going to take us a while, again, to change hearts and minds. So some people, they're not ready to hear that. They're not ready to have a conversation with you. And you have to go, you know what? I'll try again. 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is, and be willing to keep that door and open to have that dialogue. The other thing is for people that are pro-choice, there's certain things that pro-life Catholics can never agree with the pro-choice side about. So we will never agree that ending an innocent life intentionally is a good solution to whatever, that's an acceptable solution to whatever problem the mom is facing, okay? So we can never come to a meeting of the minds about that. But there are areas of common ground. So people who are pro-choice, they tend to be concerned about, it bothers me that a child would grow up in poverty. It bothers me that a child would grow up with parents that don't want to care for it. It bothers me that a woman can't finish her education or that she might lose her job because she has a baby. And, hopefully a lot of what we've talked about tonight is, you know what, we agree. We're bothered by those things too. And we want to work on those things too. We just think there are different solutions to that problem that you're addressing. So can we talk about some of those solutions? And I always think it's helpful to, why does somebody feel that, why do they feel that abortion isn't a good solution to this? And talking to them, and sometimes they'll say, well, a woman needs to have control over her own body. Okay, well, unpack that. What does that mean? Okay, well, I don't think a woman should have to bear a child. Well, what's wrong with bearing a child? Well, she won't be able to finish her education, and so kind of try to unpack that if they're willing to have the dialogue. Not everybody's willing to. That's okay. You have the dialogue with the people that you can. And then talk about, hey, did you know that there's, and especially if they're Catholic, if they're part of the church, because we have a lot of Catholics that disagree with the Dobbs decision too, invite them to participate in one of these ministries. I agree with you. This is a problem. We should do more to support families. We're starting Walking with Moms. Do you want to come be on the team? And the personal invitation can be helpful sometimes. But everybody's going to react differently. A couple of days after the Dobbs decision came out, I had a woman call, and she was very upset because her niece was posting a lot of things on social media that she disagreed with the decision, and I just don't know what to tell her. I don't know what to tell her. It's like, okay, look, first of all, you take a deep breath because you're really upset. And I said, I'm willing to talk to her, but she just may not be in a place where she's willing to listen. So, remain friends with those people, keep the door open for dialogue, and they may be willing to have that conversation with you at some point. But that is never it's not an easy question to answer. It's not an easy thing to do, but it's a process. So yeah. But great question. Thank you.
Would I be able to comment on that real quick?
What?
Can I comment on that real quick?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time too is that there's a lot of social pressure on the other side of the fence to agree, and so a lot of young people feel like they'll be outcasted if they don't agree, and it sucks that nuanced conversation can't be had. But I think I've seen some people at least plant a seed. Most people, they hear that comment about it only being a few clump of cells, it's not that big of a deal, but when you show people the development, there's websites that show you the development of the fetus week by week, and if you start showing them, they'll even be like, oh yeah, I'm not even comfortable with second and third trimester abortions. They'll see it's kind of this whole thing was just teaching, right, and informing people that don't know, right? A lot of people nowadays, they listen they read headlines or they hear snippets here and there from their friends, and they make their decisions based on that. They don't know how to really look into it. They don't really even realize how little they know about topics, and so I think the most I try to do is when I'm at my best, I'm typically not whenever I'm having discussions with people, but the most you can do is plant seeds, and that's it. You'll never be able to have someone truly get convinced and think the other way in that setting. You plant a seed, and that's with anything, I think. And then just walk away and let them think about it and see if they nourish that seed or not, whether it grows into something that changes their life.
And I think that's a great point. I've made a practice just kind of as a mental exercise of going on the website for Fox News and then immediately after going on the website for MSNBC. And just because I want to see what, like, kind of the two extremes are saying. And oftentimes they're not even covering the same stories, much less, having the same take on them, or, why something happened. And so, people tend to be, very much in their little bubble. They may not have heard any of these things, but, I think the planting seeds thing is really important. One thing that I did want to bring up that I kind of forgot to mention here, there's been a lot of talk about, women who are suffering miscarriages are not going to be able to get proper medical treatment because doctors are not going to be willing to care for them. And actually, the New York Times had an article to that effect, that a woman in Texas had to go to New Mexico for an abortion because, she couldn't get the abortion in Texas because her water broke and she was septic and nobody would do anything. Well, okay, that was written by somebody that doesn't know how maternal fetal medicine works. What happens when somebody's water breaks and they become septic is that you induce labor. And even if it's pre-viability, that is not an abortion. An abortion is a direct killing of a fetus, delivering the baby early to save the life of a mother. First of all, moral from a Catholic standpoint. The Catholic Church would allow that, but that's not a direct killing. That's, essentially a stillbirth or a miscarriage is what that is. So two totally different things, but that was, New York Times, that's for many people a very reputable source of news, who reported today that this, and often when you read news articles about medicine, about law, about Catholic teaching, whoever's writing it may be very well intentioned, but they don't know anything about theology, they don't know anything about medicine, they don't know anything about law. And so if you do know something about those topics, you just read it, you go, no. So rest assured, any good OB-GYN is going to know what to do in that situation, and the mother's not just going to be left there to, and from a Catholic perspective, there is no situation where you can't save the mom and you have to directly kill the baby. Okay, and I can share some of those scenarios with you if you're interested, or you can take our bioethics class if you're interested. But just those rumors are out there, not true. So, yeah.
Does that include ectopic pregnancies?
Yeah.
That's a big topic nowadays.
Yeah. So the ectopic pregnancy. What's kind of interesting about that is, so everybody knows what the ectopic pregnancy is. That's where the fetus attaches somewhere outside the uterus. Usually it's in the fallopian tube, but it can even be on the abdominal wall. Okay. And those pregnancies are not viable, and they're very dangerous to the mom. So actually with a ectopic pregnancy, you can't give the abortion pill. You would have to do a surgery, but the thing is they don't take care of an ectopic pregnancy by abortion. They go in and they cut out the tube and they actually remove the tube, is what they do. So when they're removing, because the tube will be damaged and you're not going to be able to, so they either have to remove most of the tube or they'll remove all of it. Okay, but you don't deal with an ectopic pregnancy by performing an abortion. And any OB-GYN will know that. So people that are saying otherwise, it's just like, well, that's just bad science. You don't understand. You don't understand what's going on. unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, there's yeah, just no. Other thoughts? And again, it doesn't have to be anything we talked about here tonight. How many of you know people that are like super excited about this decision? How many of you know people that are like super, super mad about this decision? Okay, yep. And we're going to be there for a while, and that's okay. But you know, I will say I'll hang out just for a few minutes if anybody wants to ask any questions privately. But you're always welcome to call my office. You can find me on the Archdiocesan website, or Erica knows how to get in touch with me. So if you have any questions or just want to run through anything one-on-one. So like you'll be prosecuted because, did you cause this? Did you cause the death of your child?
I hear a lot of that stuff, like, that portrays people saying a woman can't have, any woman that's having a pregnancy is in danger either way, because if something happens in miscarriage, by accident, they're immediately going to be convicted or investigated, anything like that.
Yeah, so there's a law that the California state legislature is trying to pass that essentially says there can't be any investigation. So let's say that a woman gives birth at home, it's a full-term baby, and that baby is dead. You know, essentially, and you know, we've all heard about, you know, terrible stories about, you know, someone giving birth and just leaving the baby somewhere and the baby is found. And so what California is trying to do is to say, well, the coroner can't even investigate that death because that would be going after the woman. And it's like, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. Like, but okay, so that's like the flip side of what you're talking about. There is no provision in any law that I'm aware of that allows for prosecution of the woman because she has an abortion. The prosecution is all on the side of either the person who gave her the pills or the person who performed the abortion. So there is no criminal penalty in the law for a woman for having an abortion. So therefore, there should be no question about someone who comes and says, you know, I'm having a miscarriage. Really it even being a question for law enforcement to get involved with. So I would say that most likely is a scare tactic. Now, you do have some fringe elements on the pro-life side who are trying to impose criminal penalties on women for abortion. That's a distinct minority. There's very few people trying to do that. And the Catholic Church is absolutely against that and will oppose any law that tries to do that. If for no other reason than women who seek out abortion most times are desperate and scared and, you know, deserve compassion, right? So no, we're not there. I don't think we're going to get there. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a comment, I guess.
Yeah.
Or more like I don't know, something that I've struggled with, because I'm pro-life, but when it comes to babies, I'm also for the death penalty.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I hypocrite a lot of the time. But I think it's just kind of, I don't believe that women should be killed. Yeah, I don't, like that's something, I guess it's like a case by case basis, but like when somebody, physically kills somebody, whether it be with a weapon or whatever, that's why I'm like, no, I think that person deserves to die. So I don't know, I just kind of have struggled. I was just thinking about it because I've never thought about ever having like the mom being prosecuted for or being put in the death penalty for killing a baby, because at the end of the day I do believe that she killed the baby, but I don't believe that, I don't know, I guess I just want, yeah.
I mean, this gets into kind of an interesting question, because if you think about in some states, right, if someone assaults a pregnant woman and the fetus is injured or killed, that person can be prosecuted for, the assault on the woman and the death of the unborn child. And so you say, well, if you can prosecute that, then why can't you prosecute the killing of, the other person? And so it's an interesting moral question. I hear where you're coming from. Absolutely. I mean, I think on death penalty, we were talking about this earlier, and most of us have something, if we're being really honest, that we struggle with Catholic teaching on, that I don't quite understand that, or that just doesn't quite sit right, or I'm struggling with that, or I'm asking the Holy Spirit to please, give me guidance on that because I'm just not getting it. And so I hear what you're saying. And I mean, your arguments are not, they're not invalid, right? I just think that we,
I think a lot of it just comes from like, what if something were to happen to my immediate family, and like something were to happen to my sister,
you would want justice to be.
In my opinion, that would be justice to a certain extent. I still think I don't know, thinking about that obviously, but it does happen a lot more often than, I guess.
Well, maybe a lifetime of jail is worse than death.
I think we're in a place. We talk about. There's a phrase that the bishops' conference uses a lot. Make abortion not only illegal but unthinkable, right? And if we lived in a world where abortion was unthinkable, and then prosecuting someone for having an abortion because that's just so beyond the pale, we're not there. That's not the world that we live in. And a lot of people, rightly or wrongly, everybody in this room, up till a month ago, has never lived in a world where abortion on demand wasn't available. So, it's very thinkable. Many people, that is the solution to my problem, and that is a right. And so, whereas we think of that as that's an act of killing an innocent person, and should never be condoned, many people don't see it that way. So to say, well, it gets really complicated. But I hear what you're saying. These are interesting questions. No, thank you for bringing that up, because it's like, oh yeah, let's think about that. That's interesting. So thank you.
I think a lot of social media is just horrible, because that's where everyone gets their news from nowadays.
I'm so glad I got to grow up before social media. I was like,
so it's just like especially with the decision, there were posts going around about I don't know, like, oh, my friend sent me this text and she's a doctor and, you know,
Yeah.
like a horror story kind of thing. It's like, okay, well, you know, could be true, but you know, like, this could be totally fake.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And, you know, same thing with like all the other news or stories you hear. It's just like, okay, well, yeah, that could be true, but like, what are the chances that someone could just like make it up?
Yeah, you have to fact check everything. It's just exhausting. But definitely get your news from 2 or 3 sources at least. You know, preferably not social media sources. Although I would argue that there's not that many legitimate news outlets anymore, just because everybody's got an agenda. So there's this this is way off topic, sorry, but it's kind of interesting anyway. We work with a media consultant sometimes at the Archdiocese, and he talks about, you know, just the decline of, you know, journalism and the decline of journalists that, you know, think that their purpose in being a journalist is to go out and find the truth and report the truth. He said, when I got into journalism 40 years ago, that was what journalism was about. Now it's about, I got into this because I want to share my opinion with everybody, and I will twist a story through my opinion, and that's what it is now. And so when I say I feel like there's very few legitimate news outlets, that's what I'm talking about, because unfortunately we have that. So you have to be really, really careful. But yeah.
I mean, you can go to CNN or most news reporters, and you can go to the redactions and retractions and modifications to their posts, and it's just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They really like, and sometimes they don't even update anything.
Yeah.
And no, it's really hard to, and then that's where, like, that's one of the first tactics I started doing, was listening to both sides. Truth might be somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
But like, you'll see some posts that'll be like, oh, it's a new report comes out that protests do not cause a spike in COVID, and then you go to the post, and then you read down, and then it contradicts itself and says, oh, well, there's no verifiable or there's no data suggesting either way. I'm like, well, if you know anything about statistics, like, you either prove that it is or you can't say anything about it.
Right.
And then you go to the actual study, and then the study literally says this was inconclusive. We can't tell you either way.
Right.
And then you go look at the people that wrote the freaking paper, and it's just a bunch of master's students that are barely getting their PhD,
Yeah.
and they're not even biologists.
Right.
And I'm like, what insanity is this? Like, it's just, it's
You have to be very careful. So I like to, at least, I'll either go to National Catholic Register, which is just ncregister.com, which, you know, has some of this news, but I mean, just obviously it's reporting mostly on things in the church. Crux Now, CRUX now.org. Those are pretty good for Catholic things. I like the Wall Street Journal, but, you know, even that has its biases, so they do some good reporting. So anyway, yeah, it's hard. It's hard to know.
Yeah. There's a few people I listen to now, but that's not good.
Trust but verify. So there you go. All right. Well, thank you guys. And did you have a question? Yeah.
Yes, I do. You said it changes the whole subject what we're talking about. You were saying that you have heard of people with different experiences and their reasons and why they were kind of cornered in having an abortion and things like that. What about, I guess I'm kind of in issue, or not issue, but this argument with myself, or the thought about whenever it happens with rape and incest within families and things like that.
Yeah.
What would you do, or what can people do really? Like, you're pregnant because of someone that took advantage of you,
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, yeah, that could be it. But I feel like some people don't have, they don't try to look at the bright side, whether in a way, it's not a bright side because it happened under those circumstances, but it's a new life.
Yeah.
And you can build this whole other perspective with that.
Right.
Have this whole life.
Y-
And there's so much mental issues and so many psychological fights, and I don't know, I just don't know how to feel about that sometimes. In a way, I know it's pro-life and you have to stick with it, but I think also it really helps when you start mentioning all those resources, because really it's people trying to heal from that. But,
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason that pro-choice, that side always talks about, well, what about rape and incest? Because that really that's the hard case for somebody that's pro-life, right? You guys may have heard in the news, and I think this was true because it was reported multiple places, but the 10-year-old who was raped by the adult man and was taken out of state to get an abortion, because I think she was in Ohio and they weren't allowing abortion anymore, so she was taken across state lines. But I mean, that is the case, right, that would seem to speak for the pro-choice side. And the response in some ways is unsatisfying, in the moment, because that child has had horrible trauma inflicted on her, and we don't want to inflict any more. We want to ease that for her however we can, right? And so it would appear that the easy thing to do is, well, let's just have it so that pregnancy goes away and she doesn't have to deal with that, right? Okay, would seem to make sense. When you talk about, you've heard the phrase, the ends don't justify the means, right? So the idea is we have good intentions, but our good intentions, we can't do something bad and justify it just because our intentions were good. So in this case, we can't end an innocent human life because we think this would be traumatic for the rape victim, okay? Now, what do we need to do is that, that young girl needs to be getting all the support, all the love, all the counseling, all the care, anything that she needs, but so she's already had the trauma of the rape, then she has the trauma of finding out that she's pregnant, and the fact is she is a mom now. So do we compound her trauma by involving her in the death of her unborn child? And I will tell you that with a lot of people who are post-abortive, they experience that as the death of their child, and they feel that very deeply. And if you talk to parents, they'll tell you probably the worst thing that could ever happen to me is, if something happened to my child. And so these women are suffering that, but then you compound it, and I caused it. I lost my child, and it's my fault. And who's to say that this young girl may not have that trauma if she has an abortion? Okay, we don't know, but certainly that's in the realm of possibility. I can tell you, and you kind of alluded to this, many rape victims who do carry their babies to term, they think of that as that's my child. When I look at that baby, I don't think of the rapist. That's my baby, that's my gift. Now, does everybody have that experience with their child that was conceived in rape? Probably not, but many do. and would we take that experience and that life, that unique, unrepeatable life that God has created for His purpose, is really not ours to do with as we will, and that comes down to us. Our lives are not our own. They're given to us by God for some purpose, and who are we to say what that purpose is? So we could get very philosophical, but it's late at night, so let's not. But anyway, that is the hard question, and I think even people that consider themselves very pro-life, there's not an easy, comfortable solution to that question. All we can do is, what's the best solution that we can find in two choices that are very difficult? How do we recognize the human dignity of everybody involved to the fullest? We always want to start with that question. Yeah.
Well, I think Tiffany was telling me that, if acted upon quickly after a rape, there's ethical treatments that can be done to prevent the pregnancy.
Yeah.
As far as even the Catholic Church is okay with that, right?
Yeah. So the way that works, and not to get too complicated, but if you go to a non-Catholic hospital, they will just administer emergency contraception to you. Okay. From a Catholic perspective, what they'll do, like if you go to St. Luke's, they will check to see if ovulation has occurred already or if it's about to occur. And you can do various hormonal tests on the woman. So if ovulation is about to occur, but hasn't yet, they can administer Plan B, and that will stop ovulation. So there's no egg released. However, if the egg has been released, ovulation has happened, they won't administer Plan B, because what can happen is it essentially acts as an abortifacient at that point. Okay, so unfortunately for the woman in that case, no, it can't be administered by a Catholic hospital at that point. But in the case where ovulation hasn't yet occurred but is about to, it can be administered. Does that make sense? That was yeah, okay.
She told me a little bit about it, and she really did want other people to know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, just that thought about it just now.
Yeah, it's important to know about that too.
Well, and one of the things that bothers me is that with the rape and incest issue, obviously it's a really big issue that we really do need to wrap our heads around, right? As individuals and as well as the communities, but I think that it's used as a weapon.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's you had the slide earlier. It's 1.5% of all abortions, and so it's a very small percentage. It still happens, but I really do hate that. Like, okay, we're gonna really allow the 98.5% of abortions to happen because of the 1.5%. Like, can you like even concede that maybe like, I don't know, like even for them, like would you even concede like, hey, what if we just keep a little clause in there for this situation, right? Can we at least stop the killing of with 200,000 aborted fetuses, or more than 200,000 a year?
So in the U.S., we're at, it's around 700 to 800,000 a year.
Almost a million.
Yeah, the rate has dropped. Now the rate is increasing now that we have the abortion pill. But yeah.
I had a thought with the just thinking about rape and incest. Like I've heard that like all life is a gift from God. So any new life that's created is like a gift from God. So maybe we can like try to change our thinking though, like, well, despite this horrible act, like this is a gift that can come out of it. That's from God, because it is.
Yeah, it is. we can talk about that as people of faith.
Right.
I think in a secular society, that argument, well, this is a gift from God, it doesn't fly like it would in this room, but certainly we all know what we're talking about and can absolutely agree with that. So I was in a meeting with the director in Austin, my counterpart in Austin, and she said, how a woman feels about her pregnancy when it's unplanned is oftentimes influenced a lot by the reaction of the first person that she tells. And she was talking about, the girl that she had worked with that, thought she was going to have an abortion and, had actually made an appointment at the clinic, and she went and told her dad, and he said, "Congratulations, mija, it's wonderful, and it was, that changed her whole outlook, so we can be more positive too with, and that's why when you're at pregnancy help centers or when you're at Gabriel Project, it's always, congratulations, this is a wonderful thing. And people talk about, well, so-and-so was conceived in terrible circumstances, so they shouldn't be here, or so-and-so, has a disease, so, maybe we should abort so-and-so, or, this situation is not good, the parents don't have any money. And you kind of think about, okay, I get those arguments, however, how secure are any of our lives, really? We could lose our jobs tomorrow, we could get sick tomorrow, we could, any number of bad things could happen to us, and, does that make our lives not worth living, or the fact that we're going to suffer? Because guess what? We're all going to suffer. That's most of what we do here, it seems like. So we're all going to suffer. Does that mean that our life is not worth living? No, not really. But we very much live in a culture that that tells us, minimum amount of suffering is optimal, and none of us like to suffer, but sometimes it actually can be good for us and can teach us something. So anyway, we're getting very philosophical, much more so than I meant to, but thank you. That's a great comment, though. Thank you. All right, well, thank you guys.